You can't put it on Steam's site. So the only real objective that you can use is just traffic or link clicks. So you kind of makes that decision for you based off of what's available to you to attribute the results and the performance going on with that, right? But then let's say if you are running ads to your website to get more email signups. Well, there's a couple of options. You could run a conversion-focused campaign objective, which the campaign is going to do the best it can to optimize itself to get more conversions. In this case, it would be an email signup. In that case, you can put tracking onto your website that can then attribute that goal, that action people are taking, that email signup, and attribute it back to the campaign. So that way the system can do a better job at getting in front of the people that are more likely to convert, right? So that's how you kind of can determine these things. Now, there are some nuances to this. I don't want to necessarily go into details. These are more of just examples of things you should consider when you're doing this. But in general, a good place to probably start is, I would say the one I would always focus on is just having people go to your landing page, go to your site, and focus based off of that. Can get a lot more detailed here, but again, this is just a high-level approach and being mindful of these things. And then how do you, excuse me, and then how do you start and narrow your targeting? Well, it really comes down to what type of users you're targeting, right? So example, you want more Steam wish lists. Well, if that's the case, most people on Steam are using their desktop, right? Or the computer. So you don't necessarily want to be marketing to mobile users. So you kind of want to eliminate them. However, if you have a mobile game, well then, of course you want to also be marketing to mobile users, right? So just be cognizant of, again, where people are going, where you're going to be directing them to. Because something like Steam, if you open up to mobile users, you'll probably see that you're spending a lot of money. Your cost per click might be really low, but you're not getting any wish lists or conversions, as I like to generally call these main things. So you got to be mindful of that as well. A couple other things too, going a little bit further. What should your focus be if you're starting from scratch? And I'm talking more so on from a targeting perspective here, right? Again, it goes back to knowing your audience. Super important. Know who they are, what their interests are, and start basing your targeting off of what you know about your audience. But then also, you want to build up custom audiences. Like Facebook's a great one that allows you to do this. Google, all the other platforms should allow you to do this as well. And I know I'm generalizing a lot of this here, but still, that's the key focus. And here's why: the sense when you're starting from scratch, you really want to work your way down towards to having an audience that is very likely to take action on the result you're looking for. Okay, so to start with that, that's why it's important to know your audience. So you're going to take interest groups that you have available for your targeting and set up your targeting based off of that. And then when you have people going on landing pages and such, you can take some of that information depending on where they're going. May not be applicable to Steam because, like I said, you can't really track information on Steam from these advertising platforms. But if it's your website and an email sign up, you can have people go there, and then depending on their behavior when they get to the site, are they signing up? If you have analytics or with pixel tracking, you can actually put in other metrics that say hey, are they staying on there a long time on the page? And if they if you have a YouTube video, for example, that you embedded onto the site and they're watching the whole thing or taking other certain actions, whatever it might be, those could be other indicators that okay, anybody who's going to this page, 25% of them are taking this type of action, showing really good behavior, showing that they're interested, engaged. Well, you can now start building up an audience from driving that traffic to being like, okay, these are really good, people to consider, and then building a custom audience, and then now they're showing behaviors that that they're engaged, and now you can use that to target, with things like lookalike audiences. I know I'm going into some really detailed stuff, but the point is, you're starting from a high point. You're starting from a very broad point. You're driving traffic, and then based off of how people behave, then you are building an audience that is lower funneled, right? They're more likely to act on this because they're more engaged. And then you take that audience and target to people that show those same type of behaviors. And then let's say they're actually signing up for your emails. So you're taking now that audience, and then it's a downward funnel where you're just taking those core behaviors and then continuing to market to other people that show those behaviors too. That's, again, why one of the reasons, like a lot of platforms can offer this too, but why Facebook is such a popular one, because they can do a really good job at nailing down those behaviors. And it's basically because of how the platform has been set up. So if you're starting from scratch, that's what I would do. Start with knowing your audience, doing some initial research behind like what those audiences are. Let's say whether it's game titles that they like, or just the game types or genres. And then starting out from there, and then just seeing how they behave when they get to that landing page, if you're able to monitor that type of activity. Now, what should your focus be, though, if you already have something? And when I say something, I mean specifically like something like an email list. You're already getting tons of traffic to your website, things like that. Well, again, know your audience, right? There you go. That's a simple one, because you should still try some of that targeting and such too, to see how well it can perform for you, and especially when reaching out to new people who might not have heard about your game before. And that's a lot of why you would want to advertise too, right? But then also leverage that current audience you do have. So if it's like traffic to your website, great, but even better, and this is, if you have this, I would lead with this. I would even bother with the traffic to your website, is leverage that email list that you already have. And what I mean specifically about this is simply creating things like, and I'm again just using Facebook as an example, lookalike audiences, where you're taking that list, you're putting it into creating an audience within Facebook, and you're saying, hey, of these people, I want you to take this list and find anybody else who kind of exhibits their same behaviors type things. That's all you're doing. You're not marketing to those people already in your list. That's not what it would be doing in this case when you're creating a lookalike audience. Some platforms offer similar capabilities, but in a lot of cases, they like if you're like a smaller advertiser and things like that, you can't use that functionality. But Facebook, that's what's cool and so accessible about Facebook, is because you don't need a whole lot for it to be able to have something to work with and get pretty good targeting. So if you already have something, I would, in like a list like that, I would start focusing there, because you're going to find that, again, the lower funnel everything is, if you already have people on a list, they're already active, they're already engaged, and you can target people with those similar behaviors, that's going to perform a lot better in some cases than trying to work that an audience that you're just is based off of interest alone. Okay. And this is also coming from a lot of experience I have managing campaigns and everything else too. All right, now let's discuss a really key and important thing here. Probably one of the most important things outside of knowing your audience, which is your messaging, creative, and the user journey. Now, to lead this particular topic, I really want everyone to think about what the user experience is, what the user journey is like, especially for players that are seeing your game for the first time, right? So the number one thing I would consider, and this definitely applies to everything else that you're doing from a promotional standpoint. I don't care where you're sharing things about your game on your Steam page, on different social media channels, on other forums, websites. I don't care what it is. You want to make sure that whatever you're promoting, is your messaging clear? I cannot emphasize this enough. And you know what? Sometimes it can be hard because you get so entrained and tunnel visioned that you might think, oh, this messaging is super clear. People know what it means. But if you show it to someone for the first time, they might be like, I don't know what this game's about. I mean, sure, I know it's a roguelike, but yeah, right? So you just want to make sure whatever you're promoting, it's very clear, okay? And there's let's drill down on this a little bit further. So one thing is, does your image and video align with your messaging too? Okay, because what I mean by this, and if you have an image that's showing that does a good job conveying what your game is, like whether it's a screenshot or if it's other types of promotional marketing material, does it clearly state or showcase or show what your game is about, right? And then on top of that, does the messaging also help clearly define the same thing that's going on in the image? Because if it doesn't, this is how people will react. They'll see an ad, like, oh, that image looks really cool. And let's say it's just showing first-person shooter, right? Pretty clear, definitive, that. But then it says something completely different. Maybe it's more story or narrative focused, and it doesn't say anything about what's happening in the image. People may not look at that and be like, they could just simply be confused. So that's why it's really important to make sure that what you're showing for an image is also very clear and distinct in terms of, hey, this is a good representation of what your game is about in this image. And that your messaging, here's a good way of saying it. Make it blatantly obvious, and almost redundant, that what you're saying for your ad copy is also the same as what you're putting as what the image is. And now I'm not saying describe what the image is, but just make it blatantly obvious, like, okay, these are both the same. Because again, if that doesn't happen, or if you don't do a good job at that, you'll find that it can confuse people. But here's another way to figure this out too. When you're running ads, one ad, if you run just a couple and maybe some variations, what I would probably do is maybe have variations of copy to start and maybe an image, the same image for all of them, and see which one does better. There you go. And then that will give you good enough insight to determine, okay, one is definitely a little bit more clearly defined, or I'm taking a different approach to it, whatever the case may be, and in revealing on not only what is more clearly defined, but also what may resonate better with people. A few things about imagery or even videos too is it might be worth having branding, but it's good to test. You don't want it to overtake the whole thing, but have branding on there, right? That's like the game name or whatever. Because if people are looking at it real quick, and they see the branding though, and they see the image, sometimes what people do is they'll actually go out of their window or into whether it's a different browser, whether it's a different tab, and they'll do a quick search on Steam. So they won't even click on your ad, and they might do that, okay? And then also, high contrast images work well. Why? Because they really stand out. If everything is really dark and hard to see, again, from a visual perspective, if that's not clearly defined in your screenshot, your image, whatever you're using, if it's kind of dark and hard to make out things, that's not going to catch people's eyes. But something that has contrasting colors, bright colors that pop, really stand out, and again, think of the platform, like I mentioned before. Some people have a dark mode, and they might just have the regular mode, which is standard, white. What are things that can really stand out? Look at other things that people are posting pictures and stuff. What are the things that stand out? There's very unique color palettes, things like that. It's also dependent on how your game is, but still, be mindful of those things. You don't want dark images, for example, or images that are so washed out, they kind of blend in with the background. Be mindful of that stuff. And also with your player journey and creating this alignment with everything, does your landing page align with your ads? So let's say you're getting people to go to Steam. Does the type